This is a demo of the Sélavy software, which is a early web-based tool that lets you take a document and process it into triples. So you supply it with some sort of text-based document like a PDF or a MS Word doc, and you can structure it and eventually export the data as triples. It's an early development of this. It's just to show the current status of it and to kind of give a little tutorial around how you could use it. And it's part of the Datalytics toolchain, which is a toolchain to go from documents to data. And this is kind of like a rethink of the transcript analyzer tool, which was a LinkJazz based tool for working with oral history transcripts, but this tool is a little bit more generalized. So if you go to tools.semlab.io, you can get started. You can see your Datalytics NER service, and then there's the Datalytics Sélavy tool. So if you click try our alpha version of the tool, you'll get into the homepage, and you want to click start processing a new document. And so you can pick any document that's text-based, like a MS Word document, like I'm picking here, or a PDF or a text document. It uses Apache Tika under the hood to pull out any text it can find. So I'm going to upload that. And the first step you'll see here is the cleaning part. So on the left-hand side is the text of the document that was able to be extracted, and the right-hand side is the kind of tool panel. So this area is manual. You can manually edit it, and you can go through and clean up the text as much as you want, remove things that shouldn't be there, or correct things, or change the formatting. There's also a regular expression engine here, so you can insert stuff. So say if I wanted to get remove anywhere that the word Itadi was, I could just put the text here, replace it with nothing, and it will test it, and it'll show you where that occurrence happens, and then you can apply the pattern, and it will remove it from the document. And you can always undo. And another thing you can do is to use regular expressions. So say I wanted to get rid of all these brackets that were throughout the text document. I can use a regular expression. Since brackets are a special character in regular expressions, I need to escape it with this backslash. Then I can say replace with nothing, test it, apply this pattern. So now the left brackets are gone, and I could do the same with the right brackets, test it, and apply this pattern. So now you can go through and clean up the document automatically or manually, however you want. So once you're set with how the document looks and you're finished with this, and I should add, this document that we're working with is a diary of Mary Berenson, who was a famous art historian. So let's finish this step. And now we're moving on to the blocking section. So the text is broken up into blocks. So you need to define kind of a semantic contextual block for each piece of the document. So since this is a diary, it makes sense that you'd want to have each block of the document be a diary entry. So Mary Berenson titled each diary entry with a date and then a location. And so you can kind of think of each one of these sections here as a block of the document. And we want to set up blocks because these are going to be the kind of contextual base of the triples that we're going to generate. So we want to have context for what these triples are saying. So to block the document, you have a regular expression possibility again. So this lets you define a regular expression that tells it when you want the document to split into a block. And so in this case, I have the regular expression anything, and then there's a day of the week, and then there's anything, and then there's a new line character. So this should split the document up into blocks based on each diary entry. So we can try that. And so that worked. It broke up the entire document into specific diary entries. Once the document is blocked, you can do a filter. So you can add a filter. So for example, there's a lot of extra line breaks in here that aren't necessarily needed. So I'm going to add a filter to say, remove extra line breaks, but preserve the first. And so it cleans up all those extra line breaks for you. That's one way of blocking the document. Another way is to do manually. So if you select manual split you'll enter this mode and you can select which piece of the text you want to be composed of a block. So for example, I know that these first entries are a part of a block. You can add the block and then keep doing that for another one. Add another block, etc., etc. So this is, and if you want to get rid of a block, you just click on it and it will delete it. So this is a way of doing it manually. You probably wouldn't want to do this way for an extremely long document like this one, but it is an option if you want to do it manually. The last way you can also block a document is in the cleaning mode. When you go back to cleaning mode, so we're back here in the cleaning interface, you can add a certain text character, this block break. And so wherever you put a block break, you can tell it later to split on that text. So I'm going to go in here and add this block break, for example. So now if I come in here and then I split on that block break character, it automatically breaks it. The problem is that we have this text left over. So there's a filter in here called remove block break text. If you add that filter, it will remove it for you. So those are the three ways you can do blocking, try to split the document up into its individual blocks. So I'm going to go back and remove this because I want to do all the blocks. I'm going to do it with a regular expression. All right, so I'm going to do the regular expression mode, add the blocks, add this filter to remove the first line, and finish. So the next step is that it's going to send each one of these blocks up to the NER service to pull out any of the named entities in the text. This will kind of give you as a baseline to start doing identity management in the document. So the first thing you need to do is test to see if the NER tool is online, because the NER tool service is not always online. You need to request it be spun up. So the first step is to see if it's online before you can proceed. So it says it doesn't look like it's online. Click to check the server status and try this again. So you come in here and it says, okay, the service is offline. So all you need to do is click Start Service. And so this will take at least 5 to 10 minutes for the server to boot. And then once it's ready, you can come back to this page and test the tool again, and it will tell you that it's ready. So let's take a few minutes here, and we'll pause it and then come back when it's online. Okay, so now that we see the status is online, and you can go look at the demo, if we go back to the tool and we test the NER tool, we can see if it's online or not again. All right, so it says it's online. So if there was an error or something like that, you just needed to wait a few more minutes and then try to test the tool again. But it says it's online, so let's try to start it. And so now this is sending each one of the blocks up to the NER server to be processed and extract the name entities. So we want to wait till it gets 100%. Okay, so it finished processing the text. If something happens, you can always try the process again by clicking on this link. But for us, it worked. So we're going to go on to the next step by clicking this button. So this final interface is where you detect the entities and assign identities to the text of the blocks. So each block is here represented, and you can look at the results of the NER process. So it sent all this text up to the NER server, and it returned all these entities that the server thought it found. And you can sort by people, organizations, locations, etc. So what the process of this step is that you want to define identities. So identities are like the final entities in the document. And then once those identities are defined, you can start building relationships between them and other identities. This NER tab is just basically all the text it found. So for example, here's all the places where I found Cecile. So the Cecile is not an identity yet. It's just one of the NER possibilities. So the the process is to go through these NER results and convert them to identities and combine them where there's multiple ones. So let's do an example. So for example, here's Joffrey Scott. We can show where it occurred in the text. We can hide it if we're done with it. And this final button is we can assign Joffrey Scott to an identity. So if we click that, we go to identities, we can see Joffrey Scott now has an identity. And anywhere in the text where it appears, it has his colors underlined or their colors underlined. So what you want to do is when you define identity is assign the type of identity or type of entity it is. So we have some predefined ones already here for you. There's the person type, but you can also go in and define new ones, which we'll see in a little bit. And the last thing you'd want to do when you make an identity is give it a URI. And so this is going to be the unique identifier for this entity, this identity. And so I'm just going to use a demo one, but this would be like our local wiki-based installation URI. All right, so now that this is defined, we'll notice that it found a few of these Joffrey Scotts, but if we look through the text, there's lots of cases where there's other Joffreys being mentioned. So we can go back to the NER tab and we can search for all the other occurrences of Joffrey. And we can see that here's the one that we assigned to identity, but then there's also another one. There's some other ones where it got mixed in with other words and other individuals, etc. So for this one, I'm just going to add it to the Joffrey Scott that we already made. So once we do that, we can go back and say, okay, we want to take care of all these other Joffreys, right? So instead of assigning from the NER block, we can just search for Joffrey in the text. And we'll find it anywhere where it's not already defined to an identity. So once we have that, we can actually just paint the text with by clicking on the person's color or the entity's color and assigning it. So you go through and find everywhere where Joffrey's mentioned and make sure that they're painted with the right identity. Okay, so this last one stop. And then you can click off of it when you're done. If you make a mistake, you can always click on one of the underlined and it'll ask if you want to remove it. You say okay, and we'll just remove it. So this is the process. You go through and try to assign these identities for all the individuals and all the entities that you want. So it doesn't necessarily have to be individuals, right? Although that might be the main goal. You can also do locations. So now Paris is here, and we could give it a URI. Let's say it's a location. And see that it found all the occurrences of it. We can also, do other things like objects, right? So this is about art history. So for example, this block, Mary Berenson is discussing, and I searched for the word saw because she talks a lot about what she saw on her trips. So it says she went to a Dowdy house and the Cooks and their new picture of the Spencer Rembrandt, right? So you could say that the Spencer Rembrandt is an entity that someone might be interested in identifying within this document. So you can manually add entities. You don't have to necessarily take them from the NER results. So now that we added this, we could say it is a artwork. We can give it a URI as well. And then we can also, then we would kind of assign where it occurred in the text. So for another example here for an artwork is Velasquez. So this one is named, right? A specific title. It's artwork. We can add the URI. And then we want to assign it. So you could even do that for, so she mentions Velasquez, but she doesn't mention the title, where she does mention the Titian's title. So that's a known painting. But you could say something like, the unknown Velasquez and add that as an entity. That would be marked up. So if there's a different type of entity, you can also add different types of RDF type entities. So say this comes preloaded with these three, but you can also add a new one. So let's add a new one for commercial product. And we'll give it just a fake URI again. And so it's a commercial product. So she mentioned here she delivered some soap to an hospital. So you could go back in here and create an identity for that soap. And you can mark it up. And you could give it a URI. And then give it a type, commercial product. So you can really mark up any sort of entity as long as you define the type and then paint it on the document. So throughout while you're doing this, you want to save as often as you make changes. If you save it, then it doesn't matter if you reload the page or close the browser. As long as you have this address, you can come back to it. And also, and your identities and your NER results are all still here. Otherwise, you can also, if you go back to the home page, so for example, if you went back to the tools page and then you clicked on this again, your previous documents that you had saved in the edit mode will appear down here. So you can continue working from that link too if you close the document and come back later, as long as you're on the same computer. All right, so you go through this process. Depending on how detailed you want to add entities, it could take a while depending on how large the document is. But you go through and add all the individuals and all the entities you want to make sure they're defined as identities. And then the last piece is you want to export the structure and this data as triples or potentially as triples. And so in the last tab here, this export rules is basically where you define how these blocks should be structured. So you can say, I want to make a specific rule for all these different blocks, which are the context of the statements you're going to be making. And I want to, every time there's a certain pattern in those blocks, I want to generate triples for that. So for example, since this is Mary Berenson's diary, if we say that whenever she mentions a person, then she is talking about somebody she knows, right? She knows of them. She knows they exist. So you could define that as a triple. And so what we want to say is you can pick which block you want this rule to apply to. So we're going to say for all the blocks here, we can say, okay, we want to pick a subject that this rule applies to. So right now it only has identities that we've been finding in the document, but if we want to talk about Mary Berenson, then we have to have a Mary Berenson identity, right? So we're going to add a Mary Berenson identity here. So here's Mary Berenson. We're not going to paint, she doesn't appear in the document anymore because it's her document, but we are going to give her a URI. Right, and make sure we give her a type of. And now if we go back to the rules, we can say, okay, Mary Berenson, anytime that this type of entity, so we're going to say person entity, appears in a block, I want to make a rule saying Mary Berenson something, predicate, that person, right? So you could say, use a relationship vocabulary and say knows of, and add that. So now this triple will be generated for each one of the blocks in the context of the block. So anytime a person occurs, Mary Berenson knows of, that person will generate a triple. Another example, we could say, okay, Mary Berenson for an artwork, because we found a number of artworks. We could say if there was a vocabulary, SEMlab vocabulary or something like that. You saw artwork. So we know that she's seeing these because she's talking about visiting them and looking at them. So anytime there's an artwork that she's seeing, add that. So now these are triples that are generated in the system. And if you had a specific block where you want to adjust a rule, you can zone in on that specific block by clicking on that, and we'll set the block number atop. And so, for example, if Mary Berenson was at a party with a certain person, and so she was talking about other individuals, you could say that the other individual, say she was at a party with Geoffrey Scott in this block, you could say Geoffrey Scott knows these other people too because she was at the party as well. So you can also, instead of just doing for all the blocks, you can do very specific blocks, and that way you can generate triples for other individuals based on the context of just that text in that block. So the last thing we're going to do, just to show what this looks like, is save this, and then if you click this, you want to make sure you save first and then click the export. And so what happens is it goes through and it generates the results from this processing. So for each block of text, which it provides, it gives you the identities that were found in the block. So in this case, Geoffrey was found in this first block and was found at word number 26. So if you went out 26, you would find the occurrence of where that identity was found. And then it also has a section for the triples. And so it generated triples. So this is Mary Berenson's fake URI we gave her, relationship knows of, and then this is Geoffrey Scott's fake URI that we gave him. So it generated a triple based on the context of this block and the rules that we set up. So if we looked in here somewhere, there would be the artworks, right? So in this block, the identities are defined for the two works of art that she saw, the Spencer Rembrandt, and the different positions that happened in, right? And then you would define the triples for Mary Berenson and then those two works of art. So it would be exported as triples. So you could take this results file and once it's processed, have all the triples available to you for the document that you've defined. So that's pretty much it. Again, this is an early version of the software, so we'll continue to make improvements. We're going to be doing testing around how it works and making a lot more UI improvements, hopefully, to make it a little bit more seamless and a little bit more user-friendly. But that's it. Thanks for watching.